Excuse me, just before we start the official program, I want to make people aware of two things. One is the Korean tax authority now has a whistleblower rewards program. They have a flyer about the program. I think it's very significant, and it's on the back table there. They've made some copies, so I think the fact that South Korea has implemented a rewards program modeled on the United States is a big development, and I think people may find that useful for either themselves or clients. And it's in the back table where the water is. Additionally, compliments of the National Whistleblower Center, for which I serve as the chairman of the board, and as part of their national and international educational programming, they're making available a complimentary copy of the Whistleblower's Handbook, which is there. So anyone who attends or can use this, especially if you have whistleblowers or are interested in how the laws work, it's all set forth. So they're complimentary thanks to the Whistleblower Center. Excuse me, your cell phone is active. Tell me when it hits 4:30. It's 4:30. I've now been told by the official timekeeper it's 4:30, so we'll start the presentation. First, I just want to say my prayers, and I'm sure all of our prayers are with David. I know he had an accident earlier today. He's in the hospital, and we wish him well and for speedy recovery. It's kind of shocking, but I just wanted to, I know I'm speaking for everybody regarding that matter. I also want to thank the conference for this opportunity. My name is Steve Kohn. I'm a partner in the law firm of Kohn, and Colapinto, and I'm the chairman of the board of the nonprofit organization National Whistleblower Center in Washington, D.C. My email, and I'll say it again at the end, is sk for Steve Kohn at kkc.com. sk at kkc.com. I've represented whistleblowers exclusively throughout my entire professional career, starting as an attorney in 1984 and even as a law clerk in 1982. I've seen the whistleblower laws develop over time to become what I believe are absolutely exceptional laws today. Back in the 80s, they were pretty bad. We do not use any of the laws that I used when I started practicing. All of them, in my view, are now archaic. And my emphasis will be on what I call the new super laws. I give many presentations, and often my emphasis is on how important whistleblowers are and their impact on fraud detection. And I'm going to do that in the beginning as a summary. But then we're going to get down and dirty about how these new laws have completely revolutionized the practice of whistleblowing. When you pick up your copy of the handbook, you'll see I had a new first chapter called The New Tools. And essentially, the premise is as follows. Think of every single preconceived notion you have in your mind about whistleblowing. Every single one, and get rid of them. The new laws are in many ways the exact opposite of all of the stereotypes. And understanding this revolutionary change in the application of the laws is now critical, not just in the defense of a whistleblower, but in understanding how to utilize what in fact is the most powerful tool for anti-corruption and how to use that tool effectively against numerous types of frauds, from income tax fraud to money laundering to fraud in government contracting to foreign bribery, and the list is growing. Senator Charles Grassley is one of the most important experts in whistleblowing in the United States. He's been a U.S. Senator since sworn in 1981, and he's been responsible for the vast majority of whistleblower laws that have changed the whole way it's done, the revolution. And his statement here is pretty much the beginning and the end of why whistleblowers are the key to fraud detection. And as you can read, going after waste, fraud, and abuse without whistleblowers is about as useful as harvesting acres of corn with a pair of rusty old scissors. That's it. We almost could end there, kind of like the acorn growing into the oak tree, and just let your mind move from that premise. But here's what it means. There's two types of crime. Well, maybe many more, but let's categorize crime into two. What I'll call blue-collar crime, murder. Someone gets shot. Well, there's the body, ballistics, DNA, fingerprints, entire bodies of law enforcement trained in how to do a murder investigation. But now let's look at bribery. The crime of bribery is successful if no one knows it happened. The better the fraud, the more secret. It's as simple as that. So if your crimes are secret, and the really good crimes are really even more secret, how are you going to learn about it? How will you ever detect it? This is why there has been a revolution in whistleblowing. Well, we can all go back to 1863, which is really the origin of our whistleblower laws today. And I don't want to do a history lesson, but we'll say Abe Lincoln got it right. And the radical Republicans who were running the government at the height of the Civil War, who understood that you needed to activate citizens to protect the government from fraud. There was tremendous fraud in government contracting. They were selling sawdust as gunpowder. They were selling contaminated food, and the Union Army soldiers were getting sick and dying. And they understood that you had to activate the citizenry. You had to call upon the people to fight against this fraud that would otherwise be undetectable. And they implemented the False Claims Act, better known as qui tam, better known as in the name of the king. I call this visionary legislation because it really captures the modern laws completely, but it was done 100 years before the type of society we live in today, where these laws are actually a perfect fit. So it passed, it was hardly ever used, it got amended and cut down to shape, and it really wasn't brought back until 1986. Bottom line, and when you get the PowerPoint, you can read all the details, it's also in the handbook. It predicates whistleblowing on a reward. If your original information results in collected proceeds to the United States, in other words, they get a sanction, they get a fine, they get a penalty, if you are the original source of that information, you get between 15 and 30% of whatever the government collects. So if you're that insider, the person who can see the fraud that is invisible to law enforcement, and the government collects a sanction of $100 million, under this law, you must be given no less than $15 million, no more than $30 million. So this is the seed of the revolution. Why? It shifts compensation from how much a whistleblower suffers to the quality of the information. Prior to 1986, every whistleblower law was predicated on an anti-retaliation premise. If you got fired, you may get some damages. Reinstatement, back pay, maybe punitive damages. But who would ever want to blow the whistle if after 10 years of litigation against some powerful company, you win and you pretty much end up with your job back and back pay? But that's the state of the vast majority of whistleblower laws. And people think of it that way, reinstatement, back pay. Not under this law. It doesn't matter if you're a drunk. It doesn't matter if they had a million reasons to fire you. It shifts the focus from an employment case where the whistleblower is at issue and their conduct and whether they should have been fired to the quality of their information about fraud. It puts the company and the wrongdoers in the box. And the rewards are tied to the quality of information provided. This is a revolutionary shift. We'll call it an experiment back in 1986. As with anything new, no one quite knew how it would work. So let's see how it works. We will now go up into time. This is looking at recoveries from 1986 to 2018. Under the False Claims Act. So the False Claims Act existed before they had this qui tam whistleblower component. The government on its own can uncover fraud and file a False Claims Act case. On the other hand, a whistleblower can file it, and as I said, they're guaranteed 15 to 30%. Because of this monetary award, they had to monetize the value of whistleblowing. All the government fraud cases, False Claims Act covers fraud in government contracting, Medicare, Medicaid fraud, any way you can rip off the US government. But because they have to pay an award, they had to monetize the success. Because they had to determine in each fraud case, was it a whistleblower or was it the government? And lo and behold, voila, check it out. Between 1986 and 2018, $7 billion by the government, $59 billion brought in by the whistleblowers. In short, whistleblowing was about 91.7% of the fraud discoveries. And here's 2017, just to give you a nice picture. In 2017, the US government brought in $3.7 billion from the fraudsters. The whistleblowers are responsible for 3.4. In short, whistleblowing is number one. Common sense will tell you it has to be because these frauds are designed to be secret. The success of this law triggered new qui tam whistleblower reward laws in securities, commodities, tax, money laundering, foreign corruption. It worked. It grew. And you can almost look at the entire worldwide publicly traded economy, the entire government procurement process, and the whole tax system now has these reward laws. In short, these laws cover the vast majority of whistleblowing. And they're completely different from anything, all preconceived notions. You can pick up this. I know this is probably hard to read. This is from the U.S. Department of Justice itself. I just screenshot it. It'll be in it. This is the number I love. Up until 2017. 6.5 billion paid to whistleblowers. Under this one program alone. 6.5 billion. So you can read all the stories, and I'm not being critical here, about Edward Snowden or Daniel Ellsberg or other notorious whistleblowers who are in the newspapers and part of popular culture. But while these sensational whistleblowers get a lot of press, the revolution has happened, my friends. The United States government has handed to whistleblowers $6.5 billion, and it's growing every year. In 2017, under the different programs, was over $800 million. Voila. It's a revolution. Yet it still remains, for the most part, outside of the public realm. People don't think about it. And you'd be in shock how many lawyers and people just don't even have a clue. University of Chicago published, through their Booth School of Business, published a great study on whistleblower reward laws. And I don't need to answer any questions about whether whistleblowers try to cheat and lie and whatever. They studied every single major fraud case for a period of time, and this is University of Chicago, not a whistleblower institute, as anyone who knows the reputation of that institution. And they determined that whistleblowing is number one for fraud detection. They also said, does not motivate, that the monetary incentive does motivate people to come forward. Well, you think? Monetary incentives work without the negative effects. All of the mythology of these whistleblowers lying and cheating and whatever, it's all just not true. And employees clearly have the best access to information. Of course! Who would else know whether Shell Oil was paying bribes to get oil leases out of Nigeria? Who would know that? To end the basic discussion about this, and so I can move on to more practical ideas, I've gone through the public statements of the leadership of the various whistleblower programs. People who've worked with them for years and have made public statements in their official capacity about these laws. The first one kind of sums it up, and I could literally, and in some of my presentations, I have like 50 of these. If the audience is more skeptical, you just have to keep pounding away until it gets through. But I'll just start with the top. And this was a quote made by the Assistant Attorney General, who was responsible for all the fraud prosecutions at the time he made the statement. Whistleblower reward laws are the, I don't know what that is. Weird? Does anybody know? It's kind of scary. Something's happening. Sign in. We don't know. Well, if someone would be so kind to, maybe someone out there in high tech knows something, eventually, whistleblower are the most powerful tool the American people have to protect the government from fraud. I like this quote because it uses the phrase most powerful. It doesn't say it's a good tool, workable, practical, useful, helpful. Most. And they all say the same. So now it's frozen, and isn't that fun? Okay, good. So there's not much I can do, so thank you all very much. My PowerPoint's gone. But lo and behold, of course I have my own PowerPoint, which you can't see, but at least it'll help me structure my talk. It's because I'm a big believer in Murphy's Law. Oh, it's been fixed. So we could do other quotes. I won't belabor the point. I do love them, by the way. Many quotes. New generation. Because of the success, this outlines some of them, and again, they're all laid out in the handbook with citation and how to use them, but other than the false claims, which governs the federal government's entire procurement process, including leases, customs violations, Medicare, Medicaid fraud. It's massive. You got the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. I know many of you are familiar with the fact that there might be some bribes paid from time to time. The Securities Exchange Act, the U.S. publicly traded economy, IRS whistleblower rewards, which has tremendous jurisdiction now, given some amendments in 2018 that have enlarged the jurisdiction of that particular law, and the Commodity Exchange Act. It's a publicly traded economy. Additionally, now we're beginning to get into the revolution. Whistleblowers can file the claims anonymous and confidential. Not under the False Claims Act, confidentiality is only temporary. You file the complaint under seal and secret, but in most cases it's unsealed and people know who the whistleblower was. But guess what? Everybody figured out, Congress figured it out, if a company knows who the whistleblower is, they're probably dead person walking. So they upped the ante, and the new laws provide enhanced confidentiality and anonymity rules, and I'm going to get into those. Eligibility does not depend on U.S. citizenship. These laws are worldwide in their application. They've been used extensively internationally. The scope of your U.S. jurisdiction is actually remarkable and very broad, sometimes defying common sense, in a sense what people may think. And to be blunt, European companies that are publicly traded are like taking candy from a baby half the time. They don't have the culture of compliance that exists in the United States. And a lot of times their violations are much more obvious than ours. Not always, worldwide application. And then they say these laws predicate all on rewards 10 to 30%. This is a quote from the former chair of the SEC when she was the chair of the SEC, but it reflects what everybody says. These quotes, and there's many in the presentation I'm not reading from, this is it. But this says something a little different. The whistleblower program has rapidly become a tremendous effective force multiplier, generating high-quality tips and in some cases virtual blueprints, laying out the entire enterprise, directing us to the heart of the fraud. Query: why would a whistleblower reward law predicating your compensation on the quality of your disclosures trigger this type of information coming to the U.S. government? Why? Okay, think about it. This is the beginning of a whole new way of looking at it. If your compensation is based on the quality of the information, You are motivated to give the best possible information. All of a sudden, all of the incentives are driving the insider to provide the best possible information, to fully cooperate with U.S. law enforcement, because they're only going to get a payday if there's a sanction. All the rewards come from the wrongdoer, nothing from the taxpayer. If the wrongdoer has to pay a $10 million sanction, maybe you get $1 million, $1.5 million. But if you can deliver those blueprints and the really great information up to $100 million, now you're going to get 15, 20, 30 million. But how about the $1 billion fraud? Now you're cooking. Now you're cooking. And I want to say something. And I want to say something that has surprised some of my clients. I've actually said in private meetings, I look them straight in the eye, and I say, you know what? I love the IRS. And no one can believe I'm even saying that, because nobody loves the IRS, because taxes, audits, blah, blah. I say, I love the IRS. Why? Because they follow the law, and they pay the rewards like they should, and it's done like the law says. And in our room today is Mr. Bradley Birkenfeld, whose case revolutionized this whole process. If you look at certain events in the history of the whistleblower reward laws that were game changers, Mr. Birkenfeld got in trouble with the Department of Justice. They didn't like him very much. They didn't understand whistleblowing. It was the tax office. They prosecuted him. It was a terrible thing. Never should have happened. I can go on forever. I'm not going to. What I'm going to say is that the IRS looked at the quality of his information objectively, fairly, without political bias, and evaluated his claim and gave him a reward of $104 million. And this, and I can tell you, having lived through it, and I did represent him on this part of his case, I can tell you right now that that action had an incredible impact worldwide. Because although rewards had been paid, and sometimes in the millions and multiple millions, that specific reward, I think, just was a shock to the system. It was like, whoa, the U.S. government will pay. These reward laws are real. If I put my job, my career, maybe even my life if I'm living in China or Russia or countries that have no rule of law, if I put that on the line, if I take that risk, I can actually get paid. So that's the world we're living in now. So we're not going to go to all the details on this. And this I could go on forever. I mean, because I want to get into some of the nuts and bolts. I want to talk of Foreign Corrupt Practices Act now. As we said, it's open worldwide. As of 2018, we counted 100 whistleblowers coming from 119 different countries. We knew even before 2018 that over 30 million had been paid to foreign nationals. And in today's lecture from the head of the IRS office, we were told in 2018, 12 of the 13 whistleblowers they gave money to either were foreign nationals or their claims originated from disclosures in foreign countries. And this is a map. Everything in red is where people have been coming in transnationally to the SEC. And here's the quote from the SEC. It makes no difference whether the claimant was a foreign national, the claimant resides overseas, the information was submitted from overseas, or the misconduct comprising violation of U.S. securities law and the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act occurred entirely overseas. I can go into detail about how the United States can get jurisdiction. I'm not going to do it in this particular lecture. Needless to say, it's transnational. And I can tell you right now, many major foreign companies have no idea. But also, foreign national whistleblowers, potential, have no idea. So now let's get down to what the heart of today's lecture, which is ultimately about how to blow the whistle under the modern laws. So, needless to say, I'm not against people going to the press like Daniel Ellsberg or others. It's totally legitimate. We support that. Or other forms of disclosures that are more traditional. But I will say that the smart way to blow the whistle today is the exact opposite of the word whistleblowing. That's what I'm saying. Everything has changed. The opposites have come, you know, they have that like dialectics or whatever, opposites. I always kind of like that. It's always interesting. So now, the most effective whistleblowers and the heart of all anti-fraud whistleblowing and anti-corruption whistleblowing, you engage in conduct that is the precise opposite of blowing the whistle. Okay, if I had a whistle and blew it, you'd hear a loud noise, and that's what it's all about. Now it's about being totally secret, not making a sound, working confidentially and anonymously, and delivering high-quality information about frauds directly to the appropriate U.S. government investigators, and then partnering with those investigators to help build the best possible anti-fraud cases. So we're not suing the government anymore. We're working with the government. We're not making loud public disclosures. We are going very quietly. And it works. How do we get there? I'll just tell you one little simple story. When the Dodd-Frank Act was being discussed in the Senate, and they were drafting the language, I got a call from the Senate Banking Committee that was writing the law. And we chatted about various parts of the law, wanting some advice. I've been doing this for a long time. And one of them was about how to protect whistleblowers from retaliation. And I will never forget what the staffer said to me. He said, "Steve, if they know who the whistleblower is on Wall Street, they are dead. There is no middle ground. They will never work. Their career will be destroyed. They are gone." And believe me, I knew that from some of the problems with Sarbanes-Oxley. So he devised a mechanism for anonymous whistleblowing, which I would just call confidentiality on steroids. Ultimately, one of the most important breakthroughs in this revolution. Okay, so there's a lot of small print. These are the SEC rules on confidential submissions. So we're just going to walk through them. I hope it's not too academic, but I think this is the heart of today's discussion, how to blow the whistle effectively today. The first part says this, and this is all predicated on the statute, by the way. The SEC had to do this. The first part requires that the commission not disclose information that could reasonably be expected to reveal the identity of the whistleblower. That statement is so revolutionary. It is the first time that a law enforcement agency was instructed by Congress that their method of investigation itself had to protect the whistleblower identity. So prior to this, and many of you may have experienced this, there was a concept known as fingerprinting. Everyone knew it. The whistleblower gives the information, but the information itself will identify who the whistleblower is. they're on the email. The companies will work overtime figuring out who it is. And the information can lead to that disclosure. Holy Toledo, do you see what it says here? I'll give it to you in practice. So, we hand over some emails to the SEC. It goes to the Department of Justice and wherever else it filters down to. These emails are smoking guns. They prove the fraud. In the old days, they'd whip them out, show them to the wrongdoer, get their easy guilty plea or whatever, and the whistleblower's known and they're down the drain. That's the old days. Now they can't use that email because the email might disclose the identity of the whistleblower. So what do we see in the good investigations? And I'm seeing this. They'll have to subpoena the hard drive of 6 or 7 executives, and they'll go through the hard drive, and lo and behold, they'll discover this email. Whoa, what great investigation, and they are. I love this. But they have to conduct the investigation in a way that's not going to disclose the identity of the whistleblower. And guess what? The best news is if that email no longer exists, then I love it. Press the button. Double all fines and penalties. Obstruction of justice. If they're out there destroying those documents. And since the whistleblower award is predicated on how much sanction, not a bad payday if they start engaging in obstruction. So this is amazing. And I will tell you now, the government agents are following this law. I could tell a lot of stories, but I don't know if I should. Now let's go to, you may submit the information to the commission anonymously. Now everyone's heard of an anonymous tip line. And I've always viewed them as 100% garbage and 200% counterproductive. They're garbage because it's just anyone can file anything, but they're counterproductive because how does the government know who that whistleblower is? The whistleblower can be at the heart of the fraud. The key to the law is marrying the whistleblower with the investigator. On an anonymous tip line, you may be losing so much information. They're ridiculous. They sound good. It's a placebo. So under these rules is ingenious. So the whistleblower can be anonymous, but they create a bridge. An anonymous whistleblower must hire a U.S. licensed attorney. And then it's here, it's quite simple. The whistleblower gives the information to the U.S. attorney and signs the official form that the whistleblower must sign. But the attorney gets that and puts it in the attorney's file. And it never gets produced. The attorney then types out all the same information on another form, or just blacks out the whistleblower's name, and signs it under oath, confirming that there is such a person, I've done my due diligence, and this is in good faith. In short, the SEC has somebody they can hold accountable if someone's trying to commit a fraud or abuse the system. They also have a liaison to the whistleblower, a bridge. So guess what happens next? It's kind of obvious. Since the whistleblower can't get anything unless there's a successful prosecution, and they will get more money the better the prosecution. Do you think that in every single case there's tremendous cooperation? Of course. This tool is ingenious. It provides maximum protection to the whistleblower on the one hand, but creates an ability for the United States to get the information on the other hand. And I will tell you, for international whistleblowers who are active in areas where there is no rule of law, this is it. I won't do anything but an anonymous or confidential filing. I will not put someone at risk. Additionally, in some of our great democracies, such as the most single, in my view, the most corrupt society on the planet Earth, Switzerland, where whistleblowing can be illegal, it lets you get around all their bank secrecy laws. And you're talking lots of banks, lots of money. An ingenious map predicated on this concept that the whistleblower is the key source and we need to figure out how to promote that. Voila. This just is more of the details of exactly what you have to do to file an anonymous claim. And it's in the handbook, it's in the regs, it'll be in this PowerPoint that everyone can access. Bottom line, follow the rules precisely so you don't waive. But I'll tell a fun story while I'm here. We'll check the time too. Okay, we still have time. Tell a little fun story. The investigators are great. They really are getting it, which 15 years ago just wasn't the case. So I had a case, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, anonymous whistleblower. We decided we're going to have a meeting, so the SEC people are there, the DOJ people are there. My guy is blowing the whistle on bribes in Russia. It's very iffy, not a US citizen, so it's kind of like, it's dangerous. And we go have our secret meeting to the anonymous whistleblower. I'll never forget it. And my client walks in, the very first thing out of his mouth, he shakes one of the investigators' hands, says, "Hi, John Smith." Oh, first sentence, he told him who he was. Well, that never happened. These folks honored anonymity. It was just a mistake. Boom. They weren't going to jump on him. They honored the whole way through. I'm telling you, the investigators have been doing a good job. I'm going to come back to this because I now want to talk about the IRS. The IRS rules are simpler, but in many ways even more powerful. Well, first, you can't file the claim anonymously. The whistleblower has to sign the whistleblower complaint under pains and penalty of perjury. We've tried more than one occasion to try to get around that. You're not getting around it. You got to sign it. Once it's filed, this is from the Internal Revenue Manual. And just see what IRS manual now instructs their staff. Personnel are required to treat the identity of the whistleblower and the whistleblower's information as highly confidential. The identity of the whistleblower must not be disclosed to anyone, employees, etc., except on a need-to-know basis. And here's my favorite part of the rule. Quote, "The IRS will protect the identity of the whistleblower to the fullest extent permitted by law." So that means in every juncture of an investigation, the whistleblower and their counsel can work with either the IRS or the other agencies that are involved and say, "Hey, remember this little rule? Let's not do this or let's do that. Let's protect that whistleblower's identity." And once again, I stand here to say, remarkable. The professionalism of the IRS investigators, second to none. Their commitment to confidentiality is amazing. Ask Mr. Trump. It's hard to get those tax returns. They will protect the identity. They're trained in it. So you now have these two agencies, including commodities, that have the similar rules, all with these super duper confidentiality rules. So we're in a new world. Rewards, not punishment. Confidentiality. Don't make yourself a target. And guess what? If no one knows who you are and you stay working for the company, you are the best whistleblower. And I have them right now. Whistleblowers at the highest level in the control group of a company, at, CFO, vice president, whatever, and the company has no idea they are a whistleblower. And their access to information can be incredible. And that's just how it should be. Because if you're committing fraud, you should be uncovered, they should get the best case against you, and they should sanction you to the highest amount. And any corporation should understand that anyone on their board of directors can become a whistleblower, which I'll get into right now. One of the most controversial issues in whistleblowing, and then after this I'll open up to questions, I just won't have time for everything as usual. One of the most controversial areas in whistleblowing is what about people who hold leadership positions in a company? So if you look at these are the SEC rules, by the way, we're looking at. So we're looking at rules that apply to an officer, director, trustee, partner, or an employee whose duties are compliance or auditing. So the companies went to the SEC and said, hey, these folks are paid money to detect fraud. They have a fiduciary duty to report fraud. If you give them rewards, it will undermine the system. I will tell you right now, that was a complete, total, absolute, not true. But it's plausible, and the SEC was kind of a receptive audience. Restrictions like this do not exist under the False Claims Act or the IRS, but this would cover SEC, commodities, foreign corrupt practices. Big fact. We were in the middle of that. It was very interesting. Bottom line was a compromise, which I think is probably not supportable under law. I think these folks can immediately blow the whistle, but we went along with this compromise. So now you're the chair of a company's audit committee, okay? The big boss on anti-corruption. And how do you blow the whistle? You can do it 3 ways and get all your reward, do it anonymously and confidentially. First, if it's a really big fraud that would have a material impact, like immediately, you can go straight to the SEC anonymously and confidentially and qualify. Okay, what's a really big fraud? Whatever. Second, cover up, retaliation. If this company is retaliating against that little lowly whistleblower who first raised the concern to hotline way down the road, boom, you can go straight to the SEC, fully qualified, anonymously. So big frauds and don't retaliate. Third, and this is the safe haven, 120 days. 120 days from the first disclosure of the fraud. So I'm sitting as the chair of the audit committee, and I get a little briefing that says, hey, 121 days ago, some employee made a report to Hotline, and we've investigated it, blah, blah, blah. 120 days, I can go anonymously and confidentially and report to the SEC and qualify for a reward. In short, if a company does not self-report the frauds in 120 days from initial disclosure, anyone in the company can go to the SEC. The auditor, the compliance official, the CEO, the CFO, the executive vice president. Voila. And I'll tell you, a lot of companies don't meet that 120-day deadline. I don't know if I've ever seen one that does. So, this is the new world of whistleblowing. Open to the top executives, monetary rewards, as Mr. Birkenfeld can attest, that can go over $100 million. There's no limit. Emphasis on truthfulness. and anonymity confidentiality. This is the new whistleblowing. So with all that, I know there must be a couple questions, so I'll take them now. Thank you very much. So while we're waiting, as I said before, the handbook is there, and it's offered complimentary through the National Whistleblower Center. I am the author. It's the 3rd edition. And the very first rule, which was changed, says, Rule 1, use the new legal tools. In other words, take advantage of this revolution. So thank you, and any questions, I'd be more than glad to answer. Yeah? That's you.
Why was the statute of limitations set at 5 years?
The statute of limitations is not 5 years, by the way. It's whatever Congress makes in any particular law. But Congress, years ago, nothing to do with these laws, has a default statute of limitations for criminal cases that's 5 years. So if they don't put a statute of limitations in a specific statute, it reverts to 5 years. So be it. Any other questions?
What about if the information that you're providing, what about if you're not an insider, but you somehow happen across like hacked emails or something that you didn't get illegally, but are not in true inside, traditional inside information?
Sure. So this is again part of the revolution, and thank you very much for that question. Another stereotype that has been eroded is this concept that the whistleblower is an employee and working within a company. Under the SEC and Commodities and Foreign Corrupt Practices, they expanded that definition to include an analyst. So the analyst is anybody who can take information, even if it's public, and evaluate it to present evidence of a fraud that could trigger an investigation. There's no standing issue. Now, in point of fact, that was also implicit in the False Claims Act and the IRS law. But the SEC, the Dodd-Frank Act, made that explicit. And that is one of the most revolutionary reforms, because once the whole reason for having a whistleblower law is to get actionable information about corruption and fraud, you really don't care where it comes from, as long as it's legal and the information can be introduced in court. If the whistleblower gets information through means that would render it inadmissible, then you don't have a case. Barring that, there is no standing requirement. Is there another question?
Are there any national security restrictions? So if there was a competing investigation by another agency, would they have precedence to stop that information from coming out in the whistleblower program?
Great question. So I'm now going to respond in 2 ways. First, instead of national security, which is more limited, Congress, in its wisdom, passed the Defend Trademarks Act, trade secrets, a law designed to increase the sanctions on anyone who would have the audacity to violate a trade secret. Guess what? It has a whistleblower provision. Whistleblowers can disclose trade secrets to the government with basic total immunity. So the number one way companies were using to scare employees, that's out. Trade secrets, doesn't matter. Second, non-disclosure agreements, illegal, out. So an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, both in pre-employment, post-employment settlement, out. Now let's go to national security. Remember, the whistleblower under these laws essentially partners with the government. but the government determines whether or not to prosecute and on what basis. False Claims Act is unique because it will let the whistleblower actually prosecute the fraud case if the government does not. And although the whistleblowers have that power, it's rarely used, maybe in about 6% of the cases. But under the other laws, it's up to the government. So if you were to blow the whistle, and it turns out it did impact national security, the bad news is they may not prosecute. The good news is you won't end up in exile in Russia because you'll give the information to the government in an appropriate manner. The heart is safety to the source.
What if the whistleblower was part of the criminal activity to begin with? And
I love that question. I should have addressed it. So, we crank back in history to 1863. The visionary legislation signed by President Abraham Lincoln on March 2nd, 1863, and introduced by some great senators who were fighting for the Union cause and hoping that the Union would win. When this whistleblower law was first introduced, and the concept of qui tam was put forward, the senator who did it stated very clearly, it takes a thief to catch a thief. The word he used, it catches a rogue to catch a rogue. The essence of this law is to incentivize a member of the conspiracy to step forward. So at the origin of the law, there's no moral compass. And again, this is critical to understanding how things have changed. The whistleblower need not be some moral angel. If your anti-corruption program is predicated on these, people who are doing God's work and risking everything, you will have no anti-corruption program. They're 1 in 1,000 on a good day. But also, if you're going to get a good insider, the odds that they know about the fraud, the odds are they may have participated in it and been part of it. So at the very origin of these laws was a rethinking of the morality. So everyone loves to think, oh, the whistleblower is such a nice person, they're holding up a daisy. That's not. I will tell you now, the vast majority, pretty much every whistleblower I've ever known has been a good person. But they need a reason, a logical reason to put it all at risk. They're not stupid. And the best whistleblowers are participants. So the law today generally recognizes a dichotomy. If you're the planner and initiator, you're the kingpin behind it, you're generally not going to get an award. I've been doing this for 34 years, and no kingpin has ever come into my office and asked for representation from a whistleblower lawyer. It just hasn't happened. But if it did happen, odds are you'll get nothing. So there is this distinction. But the key is, if you think it through, the person who delivers that envelope with the cash at the request of some corporate official or some intermediary might be your best source of information. So again, these laws are predicated on fighting fraud. They're not moral compass laws. They're not Boy Scout promotion laws. But I'll tell you right now, the best people I've ever met have been the whistleblowers I represent. They're unbelievable. Even those who've participated, when they make that decision, they step forward. These people are unbelievable, and they are courageous. And they tell me time and time again, when they make that move, it's all on them. How do they know the government will keep them confidential? How do they know there'll be an investigation? How do they know they'll ever get a penny? How do they know they won't get shot, especially those living in foreign countries? But if there's enough
within the U.S. legal system to show there's a pathway. And you can point to other examples. And the one I love to point to is Mr. Birkenfeld, who really paid a price, but it worked. So if you can point the pathway forward, you can get these people to step forward. The other thing, I've been in this many years, and I'll be blunt about it. When I started, I'm not like the most, like, I love companies. Started a public interest lawyer back in the 80s. But the thing that has just shocked me is how many good, honest people who hate corruption work at the highest levels of many of these institutions that are highly corrupt or engaging in bribery or other bad things. So that provision in the law is really at the heart of it. It makes it work. So a long answer for a great question. Thanks. Any other questions? Are the awards tax-free? No. And it's funny. In the early days, they even mentioned that, and they said, oh, they're going to get 50%. And the old false claims are going to get 50%. Now it's 15 to 30%. They always came right back and said, well, they'll have to pay tax on it. And I'll say the funny thing is, so a lot of the agencies, they don't take tax out. They'll just give you the award and you have to pay your tax. The IRS is different. I love them because they don't want to be stung with the tax whistleblower cheating the taxes. So they'll always take the tax out right up front. God bless. But it's not tax-free.
What about sanctions laws, economic sanctions laws, terrorism sanctions laws? Are they, like if a bank is laundering money for Iran or something like that?
I believe that these can be covered. So what happens under the new laws is you review the allegations in light of the type of infractions covered under these laws that can be extremely broad. So for example, violation of sanctions. That could come in a government contract where the company agreed not to violate sanctions, and now you may have a false claim. It can easily come in customs where someone is importing goods and they're checking boxes and lying about the origin of those goods. There's a lot of origin cases now. So what we do in my office, and the whistleblowers often don't have the slightest idea because they're thinking whistleblowing, they want to fire me, this is terrible. No, we look at the allegation and then put it into one of the boxes for which these good laws exist. And because they cover so much of both the government and the private sector economy, there's a very strong chance you can put the circle in the circle. Not all the time, but it happens more than you can imagine. Others with questions? Sure.
I was just wondering, from your experience, what do you think, what motivates whistleblowers? Is it greed, or money, or some sort of moral thing,
Sure.
or
Great question.
self-preservation? I don't know.
Great question. I believe what motivates whistleblowers is a desire to root out corruption. Now let us ask the inverse of the question. What does not motivate the whistleblower? What keeps the overwhelming majority of employees silent? Yeah, exposure, the fear of retaliation. But fear of retaliation is only a little piece of it. Just think about it. Especially if you're higher up in a company. You've got a job, you're making $500,000 a year, $1 million. You have an entire social network tied into your job. Friends, your kids' colleges, everything is there, tied up. You hate the corruption. But what would ever make you put that lifestyle at risk? And I've seen it. So I got to tell you, before these laws, I could be at a company in which no less than 1,000 people knew of the violations, sometimes big violations. I used to do a lot of atomic energy cases. I mean, violations that would just blow your mind out in terms of potential threat to the public health and safety, and not one person would speak out. And then I'll tell you, I had a case. One person spoke out, one whistleblower. This guy was smart. He taped all the conversations. So he had proof. We won his case because of the tapes. But he taped his best friend, who the kids were going to school together. They lived on the same block. This was literally his best friend. And the company called that best friend to the trial. I'll never forget it. He got up there and denounced his best friend. I thought I was living in Soviet Russia or something. He started crying on the stand. He was so emotional. The judge interrupted him. Do you need to take a break? He wipes off the tears. And he denounces the whistleblower to protect his job, his own best friend. We had the tapes. We won the case. There's the tapes with him on the tapes. That's the extreme nature of what I'm talking about. This is another way of thinking about it. Whatever careers you all have, and I'm an attorney, just think of being debarred from your profession forever. What risk would you take to face a debarment? See what I mean? To be wiped out of your profession, your career choices. So that's really on the other side. And there are a lot of good people who just need a reason. And now it's changed. Because I like to tell people they're damn well stupid if they know about corruption and don't take advantage of these laws. You can make millions and no one will ever know you did it. And I've seen it with my own eyes. It's like unbelievable. Next question, please. We have a couple more minutes. And if there are no questions, because what I'm saying is just so clear, which I always know it is, I'll just go over the one last piece I haven't covered, which is I love this piece. I just have to do it. I'm sorry. Okay. Kind of comes to your question. Why won't people do it? There is a study done out of Italy, scientific. It's right here. It's easy to find. And the sociologist who did it, scientific study, titled it, "No One Likes a Rat." And it was a scientific study about the impact of truth tellers within groups. So groups for which there were a lot of dishonest people, obviously they didn't like the truth teller. That's a no-brainer. But here's the shock. Groups they put together where everyone was honest, they wouldn't let the truth teller in to that group. And that is something we have seen, where we've seen the blacklist cover not just corrupt companies, but pretty much an entire profession, even honest companies, proven sociologically. It's something we've seen for years. That's the risk. They don't like it. No one puts whistleblower on their job application. So now let's look at corporate whistleblower programs. I love this one. This is a study of the auditing, the Institute of Internal Audit, which is the trade association of auditors. They did a study. This is amazing. They determined that 55% of the chief auditing executives were ordered to omit or modify audit findings. 55%. You want to go talk to the company auditor? This is the next one. Companies have compliance programs. Pretty much every publicly traded company is required to have one. I'm sure most of you are familiar with internal compliance. Query: should the whistleblower go secret, undercover, go use these reward programs and no one will ever know who they are? Or should they report it to the company? This is an exact quote from a recommendation of the New York State Bar Association, was asked, is this the warning that should be given to workers who report to compliance if the compliance program is run by a lawyer? And most are. Most compliance programs eventually report up to corporate general counsel. Look what the warning they should be giving, but they never do. This is what the compliance official should say when the worker walks in and says, I want to make a disclosure. I want to caution you that I am an attorney or I work for an attorney for the company and not for you. Therefore, while I can record your complaint, I cannot and will not give you legal advice. Okay. And you should not understand our conversation to be advice. I do advise you to seek your own counsel. However, as your interests and the company's interests may differ. Having said that, I'm happy to listen. What employee in their right mind would go to that agency? And I've seen so many have their careers absolutely destroyed when they have. That's the ethics behind it. Now I want to go to my absolute favorite issue on whether the whistleblower should take advantage of these new laws of anonymity, confidentiality, rewards, and be part of the most effective movement in the world fighting corruption. Or should they go to their boss? Let's find out. Everyone who's in compliance, auditing, must read the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in 2018, Digital Realty v. Summers. It is absolute mandatory reading. It should be studied. It should be hung up. Chamber of Commerce, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, in the SEC rulemaking, when they were fighting to force employees to be required to go to compliance. This is what they said to the Commission, 2010. Strong corporate governance and compliance are the fundamental building block for a successful business and growing economy. We've all heard this time and time again. Let's just go. Now, a whistleblower is fired for going to his supervision. And in fact, there's a series of cases where whistleblowers were fired for going to the audit committee. Whistleblowers were fired for going to attorneys for the company. Whistleblowers were fired after they provided information when companies hired outside lawyers to do a due diligence investigation. Literally case after case after case where companies fired the internal whistleblowers. It comes to the U.S. Supreme Court. Are whistleblowers who report to compliance protected under the Dodd-Frank Act? The U.S. Supreme Court. Now the SEC made rules saying they are. This is from the U.S. This is from Chamber. The SEC rule is entitled to no deference. The plain meaning of the act is that to be a whistleblower protected from retaliation, an individual must report to the Commission. The Chamber of Commerce, on behalf of every American business, said you should be able to fire whistleblowers who go to compliance. We filed a brief against that, and others did. It was just outrageous. Well, Supreme Court agreed with the Chamber, and this is the holding. The disposition of this case is therefore evident. Summers, the poor chap who went to his management, did not provide information to the Commission, so he did not qualify as a whistleblower. His career is destroyed forever. Thank you very much. Goodbye. So when you, and I just wanted to say that because the question you had just triggered this. It's like, why? What? Okay, I think we have time for one more question, and I'll chat with people after. And as again, I say 2 points. One is the handbook. I hope people can use it effectively. And there's also the South Korea has implemented a whistleblower rewards program for tax, and their information is in the back by the water cooler. So if there's one more question, if not, I'll let you all have a nice dinner. Is there any more questions? Thank you all very, very much. Thank you.